Hey, what's up, guys? Joshua here with Ignite PPC, bringing you yet another video. If you're new to the channel, on this channel, we specifically talk about how to take investors from 0 to 100, 250K, 500K per month solely using inbound marketing in their business. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to run PPC locally going into 2026 and how to set yourself up for success with strategy. Okay. Now, I'm going to break down some of the pitfalls that I currently see, what you need to do to close that gap, and then ultimately what your end result should look like. Okay. So let's talk about the common pitfalls I see operators currently doing when they're running local PPC. Now, keep in mind, if you've been watching some of our videos, you'll see that the cost per lead when you're running a local operation versus a virtual operation is much higher, right? So cost per lead when you're running locally, it can sometimes be, 250, 350, 450, 550 a lead, depending on the market that you're in. And, when the leads are really expensive, obviously it's a harder business to run, or it becomes a little bit more challenging for some operators. So let's talk about, who should be focused on that, running a local operation in those kinds of markets, and who should not. And I think the biggest pitfall, like, that I want to talk about here is what I would say is this, just really basic concept of, do the business economics make sense, right? And when I say do the business's economics make sense, what I mean by that is, can your business justify paying, $300 for a lead if you're only generating $15,000 as an assignment fee, right? And we can do the math. I can show you guys what that looks like a little later on. But if you're paying $300 a lead, let's just do simple math, and you're closing 1 in 15, which is average for PPC. That's a $4,500 cost per contract. Okay. Now, if you're local, about 20% of your deals are going to fall out just due to title issues, sellers backing out, all that general stuff. So let's say, you're $4,500 into it, and then we're going to multiply that times 1.2, so you're spending $5,400 for a closed deal in your market. Now, again, if you're only making $15,000 on your assignment fees, well, it's a really small spread between the $5,400 that you're paying for a deal and the $15,000 you're making on it, to where there's really not a lot left over, right? So if you are running a local operation, the most important thing is just to make sure, hey, do the economics of what we're trying to do make sense? So there's a few ways that we can approach the market in order to get the results that we're looking for. Number one is we look at what your exit strategies are. Are you wholesaling? Are you doing novations? Are you flipping? Are you doing sub 2 and creative? What does your average deal size look like, right? If your average deal size is too low, then we may recommend another marketing channel or another marketing strategy to make sure that we're ultimately going to hit your goals, right? So a common one here is, I'll take an example of a client who is out in Florida, and we had some, I think, really good data backed behind this to be able to make these decisions. But their average deal size in Florida was around 30K, right? So it's 30K per closed deal, and they were paying about $400 a lead when it came down to PPC. Now, for them, they were closing 1 out of every 16 leads, and they were only converting 75% of their contracts. So if I do the math on that really quick, it ends up coming out to around $9,000 per closed deal, right? And again, they're making close to $30,000 per closing, so that's okay. But there's not really a ton of that ROI becomes tighter and tighter as you have to scale your business. You have other expenses to pay for: offices, acquisition people, dispositions people, project managers, so on. And so it's a bare minimum, right? And so for them, what we looked at is okay, there's an extremely expensive CPL here in your market. How do we get you cheaper leads that can lead to a cheaper cost per acquisition? And in this case, this specific example, we split tested PPC versus YouTube ads for a good 6 months, and we were able to cut their cost per acquisition by almost 50%, getting them to a point where they were having a 5.5x ROI, or return on ad spend, for their ad dollars. Whereas before, they were barely getting, they were, almost getting a 3, which was, just getting a 3, but not really, too much over that, right? And so there's a big difference between a 3x and a 5.5x when it comes down to your bottom line, and ultimately being able to have room for mistakes in your business. Another issue with this is, let's say you're running local PPC and you don't have a good back end, right? Like maybe you aren't flipping, or maybe you aren't wholesaling. You're not increasing your average deal size, and you have only a 15 to 20K deal size. Well, if you're paying $300, $400 a lead, there's almost no margin for error when it comes down to running your business, right? You have maybe an off month where instead of your lead contract being 1 in 12 to 1 in 15, maybe it's 1 in 20 because one of your sales guys didn't perform that well, or maybe you didn't perform that well. And next thing you know, your return on ad spend is much, much lower because it's, there's just not a lot of room and it's unforgiving, right? So what we want to look at when we're talking to local operators is we want to look at what their exit strategies are in the business, what their average deal size is, to make sure that they can actually support the cost of the leads, right? So we're looking for guys who ideally are flipping, are really good at doing novations, or doing wholesales, and have an average deal size of at least 30K per deal, right? In my opinion, the sweet spot is anywhere between 30 to 50K per deal, especially if you're flipping. Again, being local, you're going to pay a higher cost per lead in PPC. Yes, we can supplement that. We can get cheaper leads with YouTube, with TikTok. Your lead contract will go up with those, and we can get you a cheaper, cost per deal. But then you need to have the sales staff to support it. You need to have the follow-up systems in place to support it. It's a different, working process when it comes down to the actual lead itself, right? So something to keep in mind here is that if you're considering going local with your PPC, is, again, am I able to justify what I'm going to pay for the lead on the back end of the business? If so, then PPC can be a phenomenal channel because your lead contract is lower than most channels, and the speed to contract in terms of number of days to actually get that contract is much quicker than other channels, right? 90% of the leads that you're going to turn into a PPC deal or sign a contract with are going to happen within 7 days. So your cash conversion cycle is also shorter than other channels versus mail, cold calling. Maybe I'd say mail and cold calling are probably the longer ones. Texting kind of longer as well. I mean, if you compare it to, TV is quick, PPC is quick. Facebook, YouTube are longer because they, require more follow-up. It's just a longer cash conversion cycle. So if you're a local operator and it's like, hey, I have a good back end in place, I can make, 30 to 50K, per closed deal on every single one of our deals, then absolutely, let's talk about, doing local PPC for you, because we know that we can produce you the quality leads that you need. It's just that they're expensive, right? So if you don't fit into this bucket, let's talk about what you do instead, right? Maybe you're not somebody who's flipping and your average deal size is not, 30 to 50K. Maybe you're, only at that like 15 to 20K mark. Well, specifically in this case, if you are, doing 15 to 20K per closed deal, if you want to do inbound, there's only really 2 ways you can do inbound. Number one is you got to go wider on your targeting. So you got to do maybe statewide, or you got to go virtual and start doing a bunch of states, or you have to change the type of marketing channel that you're doing. In this case, I'd recommend YouTube ads because the YouTube ads are much cheaper, and you can make those work. Now, the challenge with YouTube ads is that there's a longer cash conversion cycle. They are harder to, get in contact with. Your ROI is probably going to be a little bit better, but I still recommend that you absolutely know novations. You cannot just only wholesale in 2025 and expect to make a killing. It's just not going to happen, especially if you're doing inbound. Now, you might be able to scrap your way if you're doing like a little bit of outbound. You might be able to scrap your way and do a few deals really cheap via outbound, but it's just not scalable. And then there's also compliance issues. Okay. So just a quick recap on this video for you guys who are wanting to do inbound marketing locally. Number one thing you need to make sure you have is a good back end of your business where you can justify the cost per lead that you're paying. Okay. Number two is that if you are in a market where it's like super competitive, consider other inbound channels to, make sure that you can supplement or even replace PPC with a cheaper cost per lead that'll end up making more economic sense than PPC, right? So that's if you're local, what you should be doing. If you have the suitable backend. If you don't have a suitable backend, you need to pick a channel where the CPL is lower. You're really good at novations. You're still going to pay a higher cost per deal than if you were virtual. So that's the second option, is go virtual if you don't have that backend dialed in, right? So guys, I hope you had out of this video you found a ton of value and understand kind of like the landscape of PPC going into 2026 here. If you have any questions, if you want to book a call with myself or my team, in the description, there's a link in the description. You can book a call. We'll build out an entire strategy for you where we can take you from A to Z on, we'll look at your market, we'll look at your exit strategies, your sales processes, ultimately identify what is going to work or not work for you, and then we'll come up with a plan. And if it's something that's like, hey, it looks like it's actually going to work for you, and we're confident in it, then at that point we'd be willing to obviously work with you, right? But if you come to us and it's like, hey, your business model is broken, or we know it's not going to work, we're going to basically show you all that, but then we're also going to more than likely just turn you away as a client, because we don't want to have those kinds of relationships, right? We want everyone who works with us to have a win-win relationship with us. Okay. So guys, link is in the description there. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.